With the founding of Comixology in 2007, comic books and the way they were consumed suffered a shift in anatomy. Specialty outlets were no longer the gatekeepers of the medium. Buying your comics no longer required a journey to an eccentric and often obscurely located store. Instead, your pull list could be acquired via a simple finger movement. As Comixology engorged itself on an expanding percentage of comic book distribution, readers found more and more stuff available to them. Their favorite comic book shop's selective ordering practices ceased to be the filter through which they viewed the market. And as the archives of comic book history began to see their conversion, readers realized they were living in a reality where the entire compendium of the comic book medium was never farther away than their pocket. Digital distribution changed the way comic books were created. Printing and physical distribution costs that had barred the creation and availability of smaller independent books disappeared, just as comic book readership became more accepting of genres, themes, and models of storytelling that were once uncommon to comic books. While the advent of digital distribution saw more comics become available to more people, it also saw said people paying more for those books. Comic book prices have risen by 33% in the past 10 years. So, to summarize the thesis of this bloated intro, the comic book industry has become engorged with content, making it a much more confusing medium to get into / participate in, while simultaneously becoming more financially demanding. Let's break it down even further. There are more comic books to choose from, and choosing the wrong book gets expensive fast. So y'all are super goddamn lucky I'm hanging around the internet watching out for you and making sure you aren't wasting your hard-earned / stolen / counterfeited money on one of those mediocre books. I have waded through the mire, I have read the garbage and the gold, and the following list contains the 5 books I feel are the most worthy of your money. Or to put it in a way that's more friendly to YouTube search results, the top 5 must-read comic books, or whatever. Must-read comic book number 5, Rat Queens. Rat Queens is too often pinholed as simply a funny fantasy book. And yes, the story takes place in a world assembled mostly of broad D&D style fantasy tropes. And yes, it's a book that maintains a lot of its narrative momentum through sucker punch slapstick and punchy irreverent dialogue. But to dismiss it as a dopey, happy, chuckle time fun book doesn't do justice to the book's labyrinthian character depth, its emotionally rooted creative choices, and its surprising literary and political nuances. The titular Rat Queens are a quartet of rowdy mercenaries who have the alcoholic tendencies and sexual discipline of a coked-up 1980s businessman. Hannah, Violet, Dee, and Betty continually find themselves entangled in shenanigans whose stakes vary from, oh, we got put in jail for a bar fight, to, holy balls, there's a black sky squid here to eat everybody. The personalities of the 4 title roles are the book's most drawing feature. The girls could be best described as lovable D-bags. They operate with a confidence that borders on obnoxious, and generally muck about without too much concern for the consequences of their disorderly conduct. Yet everything they do is tinted with various mutations of a deep-seated honor. Conflict is usually motivated by the defiance of various deeply treasured relationships, and/or by the desire to establish an individual identity in defiance of some family or political norm. For all of its immature fooling around, this book has an incredibly poignant understanding of the complexities of adult relationships and the countless stimuli and circumstances that go into their genesis, growth, and eventual collapse. The book has a very no-nonsense punk rock attitude to the way it de-pantses some pretty heady topics. Several characters exist along non-traditional portions of gender and sexuality spectrums. And there's something about seeing a tribe of orcs boorishly exile and persecute one of their greatest warriors for being transgender that really sort of takes the piss out of a lot of the modern LGBT hate-mongering going on. And that is Rat Queen's secret brilliance. By filling its silly, dumb fantasy world with modern colloquialisms and social issues, it is able to portray those issues in a setting that is without bias and exposes the issue's true intellectual bones. Rat Queens manages to be smart, complex, and effective while still being engaging and funny enough to ruin a good pair of pants. This combination of derp and depth is rarely seen in fiction. Must-read comic book number 4, East of West. Unlike the last entry on this list, East of West isn't worth reading because of its comprehensive dissection of corduroy jacket-wearing issues. Rather, East of West is a must-read because of just how completely bonkers its story is. Here, let me attempt to give you just a molecule's worth of understanding of just how banana trousers crazy this shit gets. Here we go. East of West version of United States history proposes a conclusion to the Civil War where a meteor smashes into the Midwest, destabilizing the nation to the point that it splits into 7 independent countries, including a nation of free slave bankers, a nation of cyber robo-Native Americans, a nation of sovereign Confederates ruled by Colonel Sanders, and, Texas. If this isn't a complex enough foundation for a sci-fi narrative, the same meteor that split up the US also was the catalytic event for the Judeo-Christian Armageddon. The four horsemen of the apocalypse wake up and bring chaos, death, and a bunch of other scary Bible things, but the horseman Death falls in love with the princess of Maoist China, and their child becomes the beast mentioned in the Book of Revelations, but rather than fulfill that bleak prophecy, he decides to run off with his robot balloon friend. There's also this dude that can turn into wolves, and this thing. Oh, and the Horseman of Death is pretty much Clint Eastwood. Yeah, so I told you this shit got radically doofy in places. But as dumb and rootless as East of West is, it is masterfully written, cinematic in its pacing and presentation. And yes, I understand this next part is not a particularly scholarly point, but it's freaking awesome. Seriously, it's just a cool book. It's bursting with action and well-earned twists and turns. Its art and style make it a joy to look at, and reading this book is just fun. Isn't that the whole point of reading comics? Must-read book number 3, it's Batman. Batman is very much a pop culture mutant in that he has managed to transcend the cycle of fad and fall and has remained culturally penetrative for multiple decades, all while taking shape under the fingerprints of hundreds of different writers and artists. And when you consider the pantheon of brilliant creative talent that has gone into establishing who Batman is and what he stands for, it can seem impossible to imagine a creator being able to come along and leave a noteworthy mark on this cultural touchstone. Well, Scott Snyder and Greg Capullo not only left a noteworthy mark on Batman, they burned that bitch down. While many creators saw the New 52 as a chance to update their heroes with new costumes, updated origins, and other general maintenance retconning, Snyder chose to update the idea of who Batman was, moving him from a simple figure of sort of vengeance spawned via dead parents to a complex human being whose dedication to his mask isn't so much about his cause as it is about his identity. Snyder brilliantly uses small, often conversational moments to demonstrate huge shifts and cornerstones of who Batman is. Zero Year, Death of the Family, and Endgame on their faces are just exciting Batman yarns, where Batman beats up crazy dudes by being Kung Fu Sherlock. Awesome. Cool. Totally a huge part of the base joy you get from reading Batman. But all 3 stories have a closing punch, a short sequence in the story's close where a small part of who Batman is turned just slightly, and everything the character has traditionally been understood to be is gone, and we have a new, better, more 21st century Batman. Okay, I will raise my hand and say when Snyder revealed Bruce Wayne would be replaced by a middle-aged mustache and a Voltron suit, I figured the series had rocket jumped the shark. I thought the dude was getting cocky and figured he was Batman Vishnu and he could just do whatever he wanted, and that the whole thing would be a disaster and we'd be counting the issues until #BringBackBruce became a thing. But no. I was wrong. Robot Batman is just as good as People Batman, and the series continues to, get ready for this people, be the best Batman run of all time. Scott Snyder has become the best Batman writer of all time, and Capullo is the best Batman artist of all time. See you in the comments. The must-read comic book number 2. Yeah, it's Saga. You knew this one was coming. Okay, listen. Sometimes things are just really, really good. And you are right, that is not a very well-argued point. It doesn't have my normal level of analysis or insight, but Saga is just so well put together. I mean, A+ across the board. It's not a book that's blazingly courageous in its message. It's not some deep-seated well of new narrative technique. It doesn't even present an extra meaty Twilight Zone episode worth of high science fiction. For those of you who are bad and aren't aware of Saga, it's pretty much Romeo and Juliet if it took place in a world where Star Wars and Lord of the Rings were Siamese twin together. A planet of winged people are at war with a moon full of horned wizards. The conflict has consumed the entire galaxy. When a horny wizard and a winged chick have a baby together, both sides of the war hunt the family across the universe, believing their child's very existence presents a propagandal and ideological threat to their causes. It's just a deeply engaging space opera full of characters that circumvent binary classifications of noble or evil and fall into the more complex classification of, well, human. You root for pro and antagonist alike as no characters without redeeming qualities. The universe created by writer Brian K. Vaughan and artist Fiona Staples is an Exxon Valdez spill worth of technicolor creativity, both conceptually and in execution. Settings range from a planet-sized space dinosaur egg to a rocket ship tree forest to a ship full of alien prostitutes. The synergy between writing and art is the best in comics. Vaughn's scripts have an amazing ability to always open on an interesting action note and close on a cliffhanger that sucks the air out of your lungs. This is done while losing no cohesion in the ongoing narrative and manages to never feel cheap or forced. Staples draws the most expressive characters in all of comics, and the way she melts storybook narration and painted style into what at times is a brutal story creates a look that sets the world of Saga apart from all other space epics. While Saga's intimate point of view does comment poignantly on the true cost of war and opaquely portrays the up and down nature of family cohesion, most of its headier themes are underplayed. The book always seems focused on bringing the reader a fast-paced and fun narrative, full of characters that the creators have a clear affection for. Saga is one of the most purely joyful reading experiences out there, but there is one title that it still lags behind. Must-read comic book number 1, Sex Criminals. Sex Criminals is a love story, but it's not the love story you're used to seeing. It isn't dressed up in poetic gloss or organized into convenient 3-act structure like most pop culture romance. Real-world flesh and blood romance is never about the intangible idea of romance. They are about the affectionate collision of two complex human beings and the places where their traumas, vices, and personal quirks do and do not solder together. John and Susie's journey to find each other is scarred with self-doubt, bad advice, loneliness, mistakes, experimentation, transcendent flights of achievement, and brutal moments of isolated loss. It provides a shockingly earnest portrait of sexual development, breaking apart how people digest various kinks and fetishes, how people use sex, and how sex impacts other aspects of who they are. I have no idea how writer Matt Fraction, a 40-year-old adult human male, was able to tell the story of a young girl's sexual maturation and make it so believable, honest, funny, and brutally connective. But the tale of Susie's trip from prepubescent innocence to fully blossomed womanhood is one of the best narratives ever told, with panels and bubbles. Okay, so I've gone into how this book is a complex metaphor for the experience of falling in love and how it puts forth a grounded rendering of sexuality, but that is only half of this book's chocolatey goodness. Sex Criminals is wildly funny and constantly eager to play with the boundaries of what comic books are capable of. From its fourth wall breaking narration to its attempt to execute scenes and scenarios that are not friendly to comic books, like a musical number that is being censored for copyright violation as it's being sung. Seriously, it's a brilliant scene. You need to check it out. Sex Criminals is a constantly brave piece of storytelling. The concise plot summary for Sex Criminals is that John and Susie possess a superpower that lets them freeze time every time they orgasm. They use this power to execute Robin Hood-style robberies, which eventually leads them into an underground community of sexually superpowered people ruled over by an organization called the Sex Police. John and Susie decide to topple the Sex Police and go on a completely ineffectual recruiting trip to build up a resistance, and things like this happen. Sex Criminals is satisfying on every level. It's funny, touching, and deep. It is a story that is so odd and idiosyncratic that it can only exist in the pages of a comic book. But for as strange and as fun as this book is, it always feels important and meaningful. It is a truly unique read, and my favorite comic book currently on the market. So, that's my list. What's yours? Where did I screw up? What did I get right? Excited to see you all in the comments below, and I will see you next time. Bam!